I know a lot of you Adobe Muse users out there are also using Photoshop as part of your workflow, either for editing photographs or working on graphic resources that are more complicated for your web pages. And there is a feature of Photoshop CC that was added to Photoshop CC in an update in, I want to say, September of 2013. So kind of recently, kind of not. And it's called the Photoshop Generator. And what that allows us to do is sort of work in Photoshop on our design elements and have Photoshop automatically spit out all of our design elements into a folder, which we can then use to design our website, our real Muse website. So you can see here in a folder I've got a PSD file and I've got a Muse file. And if I look at the Muse file here, it doesn't have any graphics in it yet. It's just a bunch of shapes and text boxes, but no graphics yet, because the graphics are all happening in Photoshop. Here is that PSD file that I have sitting next to my Muse file. So it's not finished yet. I've still got to get a few more icons in there, and it's an ongoing process of building these graphic resources. But let me grab a few more things here. Let me go to playback, grab this YouTube style play button. So I'm able to work in Photoshop as a designer and not so much think about the web just yet. I consider myself a web designer, but I'm a web designer by way of being a graphic designer who does web stuff. So not everything that I do I want to do in Muse. A lot of it pulls me back toward Photoshop. So you can see here that I'm dragging in some icons from the icon mega pack right now. I'm just trying to get some graphic resources in here so that way I can show you guys what this feature is all about of Photoshop. So now I've got some graphic resources in here and I've got a style applied to this layer. I'm just going to copy the style that I have on this layer and I'm going to paste that style onto these other layers. So I've got that kind of 3D indented effect. So now I've got these graphic resources that are part of a Photoshop document, but they're not accessible in Muse at this point because they're, well, just in Photoshop. So what I can do at this point, this is the coolest thing, I can go up to File and I can go down to Generate, and I can turn on image assets. And what that's going to do is back in my Finder over here, if I go and find that PSD file, it hasn't done it yet, but what it's going to do is it's going to create a folder right next to this PSD file, and inside that folder is going to go all of my graphic resources. So why isn't the folder there? Where are my graphic resources? The answer to that comes down to your own personal selection of which layers and which objects you would like to have exported out. And the way you go about that is by choosing the layer. In this case, I have the little open sign down here, which is the store icon. I'm going to name this layer store icon. And then what you do is you add .png or .jpeg or GIF. In this case, I want it to be a transparent PNG. So store icon .png. And when I hit return, now that that layer is a PNG file, it gets spit out as a PNG file. So here's that folder I was talking about. And inside that folder, there's my PNG. If I go back and I make a change to this PNG, it will automatically and almost instantly update that file. An example of that could be this guy here, a little too big. If I make it smaller, let's say for instance I had already PNG'd that, it would make that PNG smaller automatically. So I'm going to name this tutorials.png. This guy here I'm going to name freebies.png. And then if I scroll up a little bit, I have my learnsketch.com logo, which is the project I'm working on. I'll add .png to the end of that. And then tips and tricks, I forgot that one. So tips and tricks.png. Now I mentioned it could be a PNG, a JPEG, or a GIF file. These are PNGs because these are graphics that have transparent backgrounds, but as an example here, I've got all of this area in a group. I've got this whole icon set in a group. And if I were doing this for a client and I want to show the client what I've done, see if they like it, see what sort of feedback they have, rather than taking this, building a functional web page, giving it to the client, having the client say they don't like it, having to come back to Photoshop, rebuild the assets, go back to Muse, rebuild the web page, upload the web page, that's a big waste of time. So what I can do here is homepage icons as a group, but I can add .jpeg to the end of the name, and it will create a comp of that group and spit it out as a JPEG. So I can immediately grab this and I can drag it onto mail and I can send it to my client. So that's pretty cool. It might not go in the final web page as a flattened JPEG, but at least I can create it for the client or even for myself if I want to have some sort of record of what I've done in Photoshop here. So you can see tutorials is here as a PNG, and tutorials is part of this bigger comp. So Photoshop's handling all this for me. The only thing you have to be aware of is that two layers or two items, two objects, can't have the same name. If they have exactly the same name, Photoshop will only export one of them and not both of them. So you got to be careful with that. And I don't know if anyone noticed, but here I'm working on a Retina display, and this is 100% of my Retina display resolution. So if I'm working on two different versions of a file, and I need a half-size version and a Retina version, in this case, the regular version is really the Retina version because that's how big my Photoshop file is. It's a Retina resolution Photoshop file. So I'm actually going to add @2x to the end of this file name. Not because it does anything right now, but because it's going to remind me that this is the Retina version. And then the other thing that you can do here, which is really cool, is if I need two versions of the same thing, I could say store icon.png with a comma and a space. Now, because the file names are different, it is going to give me two separate files, but they're going to be the same size. So I haven't actually accomplished fixing the size of the file. So what I could do is I could add a prefix to this first one, the one that's not @2x, of 50%. By adding 50% before the file name, it is going to automatically scale it to half the size. I can do 50%, I can do 200%, 500%, whatever I want. And it's going to give me that second file if I come over here and look. So here's store icon.png, here's store icon @2x. That's the double-sized one. That's at that the Retina resolution. So this is a really incredible tool. You can name up your layers using these file name extensions, and you don't have to save or export anything. It does it all for you. And then I can just start grabbing this stuff and dragging it into my Adobe Muse file. So here's freebies.png. Is it going to fit? Of course it's going to fit, except I designed it at Retina resolution. So I got to go back and I got to fix my file names here. So this tutorials is actually going to be 50% tutorials. I'm not going to bother with the two different versions right now. Just for the sake of example, I'm just going to make my half-size regular resolution files. So now that I put 50% before each of these, it's going to go back and it's going to regenerate all of these PNGs to be the right size. So I can now drag these PNGs directly into Muse, and notice it is smaller. It is the right size now, and I can put that where it belongs. So I mean, this is really incredible. And if I do decide to make a change here, if the client or if myself, since this is my own project, if I decide that I would like to make the logo a different color, for instance, let me make sure that that logo is coming out at the right size. Let me do 50% here, since again my Photoshop file is double the size of my Muse canvas. If, for instance, the logo is going to change color, let's say I go in here and I throw a color overlay on top of it and set that to hue, and let's say that that's going to be the actual color, this red color. When I come back out here and I look at the folder, boom, it already updated. So let me drag it into Muse like that. Oops, I accidentally dragged it back into Photoshop. Alright, let me drag it into Muse like this, the red version. And let's say I show the client and the client says, ew, I don't like that. And by the way, this pixelation here is because I haven't previewed it in the browser and I'm scaled down to 75%. So let me preview it in the browser, show you guys how clean it looks. Looks perfectly clean, perfectly smooth. And I'm going to come back over to Photoshop. I'm not even going to mess with the PNG over here. I'm just going to go back into Photoshop and I'm going to clear that layer style. So it just goes back to the regular color. This will in turn update the PNG file. And if I go back into Muse, now Muse does not automatically update assets that have changed, which is kind of lame, but if you go over to Assets, you find the Assets panel on the right-hand side or wherever you have your panels located. If you find that asset that needs to be refreshed, you can just click on it over here, a right-click specifically, and I could say Update Asset, and that updates now. I wish Muse would automatically update the assets after they've been dragged in, but unfortunately, if you've placed something in a Muse file, it does not automatically update as you make changes to it. But it's still pretty huge just being able to go into Photoshop, play around, and have it automatically refresh your resources. You just have one extra step in Muse to do, and then you're done. So I know you're not all Photoshop users out there, but if you are, a lot of you are subscribed to Creative Cloud and have Photoshop, Muse, and everything else. I think this feature is a must-use Personally, I cannot live without it, and I don't remember how I did live without it before that update back in September. So hopefully you guys like this tutorial. If you guys are interested in learning more about Sketch 3 just came out for the Mac. For those of you Mac users, you can head over to learnsketch.com, put your name on the list, and when I launch it, you guys will be the first to know. So please subscribe if you haven't already. I've got more cool stuff coming next week.